Elif Shafak's long-awaited novel comes out on the 8th of August, and I was lucky enough to get an early copy. So here is your spoiler-free review of There Are Rivers in the Sky, a lyrical exploration centering around one lost poem. And not just any poem, in fact, but the Epic of Gilgamesh. For literary nerds like myself, having this vivid reimagining centering around the epic and seeing people connected across time and culture by the beautiful words of the ancient work is an incredible feeling. We have three very different characters whose stories are all extraordinary in their own way. We have two very different rivers, the river Tigris and the river Thames, and finally we have one drop of water. One single drop of water, because the premise is that humans may forget, but water remembers. Water never forgets. Humans may commit the same mistakes, the same vices, give in to the same unspeakable acts of cruelty year upon year, yet humans also develop beautiful new things, show compassion, live remarkable lives, and through it all is the same drop of water, over and over again. H2O. So let's talk about our three characters, our three elements, our three molecules of the most underrated, precious resource on earth. Arthur, a child quite literally born on the banks of the River Thames. In Victorian London, amongst the pollution and grey from the sewage, Arthur is nicknamed King Arthur of the sewers and the slums by a group of jovial toshers who suddenly found themselves unexpectedly delivering a baby on yet another danger-fraught mission. He's born into poverty, but he's determined to break the cycle. He will not be like his alcoholic father or his depressed mother. He's different from the start, possessing a brilliant memory bordering on something akin to a fairy tale, because he never forgets. Every minute detail Arthur remembers. It is both a curse and a blessing. He remembers details like the snow that fell on the night he was born mixed with his mother's milk, to any specific day in any specific year. Like water, Arthur never forgets, and this memory grants him an apprenticeship at a printing press. More literary connections. The printing press prints a lot of the classics that we ourselves admire and love today. There Are Rivers in the Sky is filled with so many Easter eggs for the bookworm, so for the attentive and well-read reader, that in itself will prove to be a fascinating experience. And so Arthur works at the printing press, always the most hard-working apprentice, knowing he cannot afford to fail, because the survival of both him and his family depends on his income, and through it all he's drawn to one specific work, Nineveh and its remains. Nineveh calls to him. He longs to leave London. He dreams of traveling to far-off lands. And in fact, a chance encounter at the British Museum may be his key to escape. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, we have Naren, a young Yazidi girl living on the banks of the Tigris with the person she loves most, her grandma. The other person she loves most is her father, who's a traveling musician, so he's often not home. But for her birthday, the family decides to travel to the Holy Valley, the Lalish site in Iraq, to baptize the young girl as part of her beliefs. Naren is excited to make that journey, if nervous, because she knows that she has a rare disease, because of which with every day she's progressively losing her hearing, eventually causing her to become deaf. Nevertheless, the whole family eagerly awaits that journey, even if they're nervous, and they're happily traveling along when they suddenly find themselves abruptly in a war-torn land. ISIS militants began to carry out a mass genocide, brutally murdering every Yazidi on the way and calling them devil worshippers. So Naren and her family find themselves in great danger and soon become separated. But the year is 2014, and the construction of a new dam, the new dam that Turkey built, will threaten to leave them without a home, because the water will rise, burying the historic city and the graves of their ancestors. So they find that they have nowhere to return, and nowhere to go, and nowhere to be welcomed. Fast forward 4 years later to 2018, to our final molecule, Zalika, a hydrologist who finds her marriage in shambles. Forced to move out, she decides to live in a houseboat, contrary to the wishes of her uncle, who has financially supported her and emotionally supported her ever since the death of her parents. But is the uncle's support a golden cage? And so Zalika finds herself in a houseboat in the middle of the River Thames. Unlike the other two characters, Zalika's battles are more emotional and internal in nature. It is not Naren who's threatened by very real forces based on real life events that happened by a real life genocide. Neither is it Arthur, threatened by poverty and cholera and illness in the extremely unsanitary conditions of Victorian London. It makes for a good balance to have the characters fight different struggles. Yeah, and yet, even with different struggles, they're all united by something. Very much in the theme of identity and division that you know and love this Turkish British writer for, we have those very same elements here. And it's an incredibly poignant moment for us to witness when the three characters finally, metaphorically, come together and we see what makes them similar rather than different. It's in the similarities of humanity rather than division where all of the brilliance and compassion and incredible events lie. As always, Shafak weaves her narrative with the utmost care and precision. The attention to detail is wonderful. The novel follows three extremely different lives but manages to hold that balance very well. However, as is often the case with narratives that follow three distinct points of view, it sometimes occasionally happens that one character's view is far more interesting than others, and invariably we find ourselves drawn to one character far more than another. And so sometimes the book drags because it doesn't drag from the perspective that it's like tedious or boring, it simply drags because there's another character we would rather follow at this specific moment. And that's something that's very hard to predict for a writer. It's normal for books like these. And yet, the short elements of every chapter, the fact that every chapter is snappy and amusing, and there's a stunning level of detail and a wonderful description of the characters as they know it, and there's astounding historical and literary knowledge supplementing every chapter, makes it interesting for us to carry on. It makes the book unputdownable because even if certain moments are tedious and they drag, there's just so much in this work that there are so many other countless fascinating details that you want to follow, and you keep on reading the book, if not out of, I don't know, a desire to find out more about a specific character, but out of curiosity and out of an endless desire to continue living in this world of knowledge that Elif Shafak presents to us. And I'd like to quote something that Shafak wrote in the acknowledgements. "This novel is where my heart led me. This novel is my love song to rivers, those still living and those that are long gone." And truly, some of the most beautiful descriptions in this novel are about bodies of water and elements of nature. It's so clear that a lot of research has gone into this work, and for me that is both a strength and a weakness. A weakness not in the research, but in the execution. There is so much detail about every little aspect, every little tiny thing, and in the characterization this is without doubt a strength, because we wait with bated breath to see if Naren and her family will escape. We eagerly want to support Zalika through her husband filing for divorce. We are as excited as Arthur to discover this brilliant world of the Mesopotamia. And there's just so many descriptions of their everyday life, all of the various professions, all of the kind of mundane things that we wouldn't normally ignore. It utterly transports us to the setting. But occasionally the book tips into the realm of the nonfiction with lengthy paragraphs describing events and news that are contemporary for the characters, like the Great Exhibition or like a cholera outbreak, right? And don't get me wrong, of course it's important for the character's life, it's important for our understanding of the period of what's going on in the story as a whole. But the switch from the tone of like lyrical, wonderful description of an emotional moment to a more non-fiction, this is the fact, this is what happened, and it's a lengthy chunk of information, is very jarring. And it often feels like Elif Shafak has done so much research and she has learned so many interesting things, and she's just unable to, like, you know, control herself, and she really wants to share all this knowledge that she has amassed from pouring so much effort into this wonderful book. And occasionally the shift in tone is a bit difficult. She just pours it all out and she forgets that there's a plot, that there are characters, that there are emotions. It lacks from a literary point of view in the kind of flow, if that makes sense. And I think that this is a work that is so ambitious in its scope because it really travels across cultures, across time, across different people. But at the same time, it's so ambitious and it's so condensed into a few pages. Of course, it's clear that things will be omitted, but it's a lengthy work still, nonetheless, and it's a difficult one. And having these switches in tone is a bit exhausting. And I usually love Shafak's work because I feel like it always manages to handle the depth and breadth balance very well in the scope that it covers, but at the same time it's not superficial, it's not surface level, and I feel like with this book the balance was a bit more off. And perhaps because of this, because there's so much to fit in, there's a more concrete and rigid structure, which again is not a bad thing, but I feel like it lacks some of that fluidity and like flexibility that attracts readers in the first place to Shafak's work, because her writing is always beautiful and there's a feeling that the story develops on its own. Whereas here, I do sometimes see like the writer's hand manipulating certain elements. So it's far less subtle and far less enjoyable as a flow. And it would have been more beneficial to see like more exploration of some of the quote-unquote bad characters, like the alcoholic father, to see what made them this way. I feel like it lacks a lot of the nuance that is usually present, and as a result of this, some characters fall flat, and perhaps they fall flat because there's so much focus on the three main characters, because again, I think they're very sympathetic, they're very exciting to follow along, but it's just like the rest of them all serve as cardboard cutouts to prop up the main characters, to give them the spotlight. And I feel like that's definitely a weakness because that's not usually the case with Shafak's work. There's subtle nuance and these tiny little details and pieces of incredibly emotional and to the point descriptions of secondary characters, but not so much here. Don't get me wrong, in general, the mixture of plot and character is very well carried out. This is just like wishful thinking on my part and a warning to you about what I think this book lacks. In general, when making this video, I honestly really struggled to put into words what I wanted to say because I feel like it's such a hard book to review since there are so many great and fabulous elements that you can just spend hours talking about, but there are so many moments where you're like, yeah, but like it could have been better, or like, yeah, but this is not my new favorite book. And that is, again, not to say that this is a bad book. It's still a book that I immensely enjoyed. It's just not automatically a new book that goes straight onto my shelf of favorites. But that being said, it is also a work I would recommend as an example of great fiction. And what I mean when I say fiction is more effective than other forms of media in getting us to care, in startling us out of apathy. Because if somebody told me that in 2014 there was a Yazidi genocide, I'd be like, that's terrible, and I'd store that in my mind as a memory, as a statistic, as a fact, and move on. But with stories like these, you see that there's an emotional layer. You see why you should care, because you see that these are people just like you. You could have been there in another world, in another life. The saying is that one death is a tragedy, but 100 is a statistic. And I think that it's books like these exactly that show you that actually no, 100 deaths should not be a statistic. 100 deaths is just 100 times the tragedy, and you see that like the one death, every person has their own story. It startles us out of that statistic mentality. I feel like Shafak in general deals with such emotional issues and heavy issues extremely well because it never pushes us to be like, oh, like look at those poor Yazidis. It never teaches us to be sentimental. It just shows us why we should be as humans, why we should care that this happened, why we should continue to care, and why we should continue to take actions to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And in fact, all of this is done in wonderful prose, and that is the power of fiction. And a pleasant bonus of this, of course, is that it's a conversation starter about who history belongs to, about the role of explorers when they're looking for artifacts, about how mass genocides like this can be prevented, and it's conversations that lead to change. For a book club, I'm sure that this will spark a fierce discussion because this is a book that will make you feel amazed, angry, sad, impressed. Above all, it is a journey, and a journey at the end of which you feel a multitude of things, but you also keep thinking about this book and coming back to it again and again. If you're willing to be patient and are a fan of Elif Shafak's other work, I would definitely give this a read. If you're less patient and you want to go straight to her better, greater works, my personal favorite is The Island of Missing Trees. But that's not to discourage you from not reading There Are Rivers in the Sky. It's hopefully to provide you with a balanced and kind of overall opinion on the book that comes out on the 8th of August. Thank you very much to Netgalley and Penguin Books for providing me with an electronic copy of There Are Rivers in the Sky in exchange for an honest review. The review that you see before you. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'm so happy to be back after my long holiday. And yeah, in case you were wondering where I've been these 3 weeks, I have been traveling through Japan and through Hong Kong, and you can find all of this and other literary content on my Instagram, Polina's pages, so please give that a follow to keep up with me even when I'm offline on booktube. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next week.